Thank you, Tamandra, and good afternoon, everyone. And I certainly don't want to get red carded by you, Tamandra. Perhaps I could toady up to you by saying, actually, I'm going to be buying your book later on today. Not least because, and I hope it's going to be signed coffee too. Not least because when I saw the title "Technology is Not the Problem," I always think that would make a great headline actually for my 6 or 7 minutes, because that's absolutely the perspective that I'm coming from. Not least as an educationalist, not as with other members of the panel, experts on AI. And really what I wanted to sort of throw out there is, because it is a complex debate, but I think for me you can boil it down to 3 different perspectives on this question of can AI help us with the productivity impasse. I think in broad terms what you'll come across are what I would describe as the utopians on this subject. Then there's the technology pessimists, and then there's sort of where I am on this debate, which is the rational optimists. And I'll say something about each of those groups. And I actually think, by the way, we need all 3 of those groups in this debate. I'm not sort of making a normative judgment that one's got better answers than the other ones. But let's start with the utopians. I mean, in a sense, this idea of creating a society in which essentially technology eradicates the need for physical labor of any kind is not new. Thomas More was writing about this in 1513. In fact, he invented the term utopia. That's where it comes from. Not many people actually would put that very sober post-war or neoclassical economist John Maynard Keynes in the utopian camp. But actually, if you read his 1930 essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, so essentially he's talking about many of us in this room. I'd certainly just about qualify for being a grandchild of that generation. But what Keynes talked about in that 1930 essay was that by 2030, he believes that a combination of compound interest, obviously his great theories on money, but also productivity would result in us having a 3-hour day. And in fact, what Keynes was really concerned about in 1930 was the extent to which that productivity dividend would result actually in us as a species, as human beings, fearing the dread of not really having enough work to go around, and therefore wondering what we would do with our leisure time. And what's interesting, since these groups aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, is then you get into the post-war sort of economists and what I call the technology pessimists. And actually a very good example of that, I recommend his book. Daniel Susskind, who wrote A World Without Work just a couple of years ago. And his sort of central thesis really is that AI and technology and automation will be so fundamental in terms of its transformation that we need to start thinking now about policies for dealing with that world without work. And like a lot of academics, actually, from Suskind's worldview, his prescription, which I don't agree with, that he arrives at, is that the answer to that world without work is a universal basic income. That's basically where he gets to. And then there's this third group of a sort of rational optimists that take the long view, as I do, which is, first of all, this idea of technological unemployment is not new. You can go right back to, the invention of the stocking frame and William Lee's machine. It had 2,000 moving parts. It was actually first industrial revolution, so it wasn't fully yet part of what we now call the commodity labour market. But that's where the word Luddites, where this idea of smashing up these machines comes from. And you see it actually throughout the whole post-war literature, and I've just I've got a book coming out. In fact, I'm going to plug my book now. I've got a book coming out next year on skills policy and the future of work, and I've spent far too many hours in the records office at Kew, reviewing actually a lot of the primary source evidence of this issue about technological unemployment. It comes up time and time again, this idea that automation, it was automation in the 50s and 60s, it was the microprocessor in the 70s, and now AI is just the latest iteration of that. And the thing is, and I'll wrap up now my comments on why I'm a rational optimist, is that it seems to me that with every major economic transition, particularly those that potentially bring in GPTs, these general purpose technologies. 2,600 years ago in the Iron Age, horses were the main mode of transportation for our own bipedal species. And that didn't change, right until the great horseshit crisis in New York and London of 1890, when seriously, planners there worried about what they would do with the equivalent of 4 feet of manure that, was coming into these metropolitan areas. Within a decade, the petrol combustion engine steam just before that put an end to that particular crisis. And that's really where I come from in terms of this technology debate. We just don't know. We can't predict the future. We certainly can't predict the jobs. And I'll just end on this final story, because I was an advisor just across the road at the Department for Education in the early 2000s. And I never forget being invited to a seminar in Downing Street called Skills and Lifelong Learning, the Future. And it was in 2002. And it was obviously before Mark Zuckerberg's creation of Facebook. It was before the iTunes iOS platform was invented. And here are all these great economists and others, decision makers, educators have been invited to a meeting with, say, Tony Blair, to discuss what the jobs of the future would be. And we could never have predicted what was just around the corner with social media, with AI. And here we are 20 years on, and 3% of the British labour force relies on or is related to that technology, i.e. jobs in social media, marketing, digital marketing. No one could have anticipated that just 20 years ago. The iOS platform that obviously has an ecosystem of app developers, that employs in Britain today 440,000 people. That's more than we had people working in the coal industry in the 1970s. And that's really my point about, this idea that technology drives unemployment is not a thesis, in my view, you should entertain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom.